You learn the limitations that glass has. And you work with that. And then there's also, because it's not just my two hands touching this piece, someone is bringing over that glass, and more than likely it's not going to be the same every time. And I'm going to have to kind of work with that. I'll change my style to balance out whatever needs to be balanced out. I think to make artwork, it's very important to be a good craft person, and it goes back to the fluency, being able to create into an object or a painting or whatever, what your idea is. I just don't ever want to feel like I've defined myself as just a craft artist. I think a lot of people come in here and expect me to be making the same things in just a little different color, which I didn't get into it for that. I have that little bit of mad scientist in me that likes to come into my lab and like throw a few other things in the pot and see what comes out. I think I'll always be that way. I'll always want to make new things and not be confined to any sort of title or whatever. I make things. So I grew up in Florence, Alabama. My father's an engineer, chemical engineer, and my mother is an artist. She's a painter. And I think a lot of times when I look back, trying to figure out what kind of went into me to make me what I am as far as what I make. So I can look at my mom and see the artist side, the ideas and all the engineering side. I had to build the equipment in order to make what I make. A lot of the equipment was specifically designed for the type of glass work that I do. In 1990, I went to Auburn and I started just all the basic classes, and I decided I wanted to be a marine biologist. I don't know, I think everyone's kind of drawn to the water to some extent, whether to get in it or to be fearful of it. It's something really beautiful about water. Like I said, I'd always drawn growing up, and a lot of what I'd drawn was pictures of Jacques Cousteau and scuba divers and all this interest in the colorful things that are underwater. So I started getting finally into the marine biology courses, and I found out what it was going to happen was it was very unlikely to be a scuba diver, and I was also being more drawn to wanting to make things, and I took a stained glass class when I was at Auburn. I started learning how to do that, and he let me borrow a book, and in that book there's a picture of someone blowing out a big disc of glass from like the 1800s, and that was how the original handmade glass was made, and it looked much more interesting to me to get involved in than all the glass splinters. I'd much rather be burned making these beautiful molten glass things. So I found someone in Birmingham, and it was Cam Langley. He works by himself making blown glass flowers and bouquets, and I visited with him and asked if I could work with him for a while, and he wanted to work alone. So I showed up again, and I showed up again, and I showed up again, and 6 months later I showed up just about every day. And he eventually kind of got used to me being around, and we got to be really good friends. It might have been the first day I watched him, he let me gather glass out of the furnace. Maybe the second day, but it was real quick. He was real open to share. I was real eager to try it. I mean, you can see from when you watch us work that it's a remarkable material. It's unlike wood or metal, or it's unlike anything. It has its own little life to it. And you get to learn this material in so many different ways to be able to work with it. It was just real special. There was something about the material that just I was able to speak clearly with, and even though it was a very difficult material to work with and translate idea into object, it felt natural to me. When I was at Auburn, when I'd switched to art before I was able to switch over to do glass at another school, I did ceramics. I threw pots for a while, but it's just not the same. People call these glass pots, but they're not. I mean, you're working with bubbles, you're working with, I don't know, you're like making shapes out of light. I mean, like the glass just absorbs light. But yeah, I mean, you can build things similar to clay. The water bowl that I'm making, it is kind of like coil building of a pot almost, similar. And I think it's good to look at other media and see how they work, not to be so limited by the historical perspective of how things are made, that you are open to challenge the material and challenge yourself in how you work. My first quarter at Auburn, I met some friends, and actually one of them ended up being my wife, and we came to climb here at Little River Canyon. That was the first of coming up here almost every weekend to explore Little River Canyon, whether we were looking around for a good place to swim or hiking or climbing, and eventually kayaking, and then more climbing. Even though it's like a dream for me to be here, we never really intended on being here. We did intend on being in Alabama because we knew we were going to have a family and we wanted to raise our children close to grandparents and to other family. So when Chrissy's father was across the creek and my parents were only 3 hours away and Little River Canyon was just a few minutes away, I mean, this was it. This was the place. The glass that I use it's a special formula of glass that's got certain fluxes in it to make the silica melt at a lower temperature and to stay molten and pliable for a longer period of time, that an artist like myself can actually shape the glass and work with it, as opposed to a Coke bottle glass that would freeze up. The material is melted in a furnace at around a little over 2,000 degrees, and it goes from a white powder, a special mix of powder, to this clear glass. And then it's your responsibility to make something good out of this glass that you've made. Once you have this molten glass, we have about 5-foot long blowpipes that we preheat so the glass will stick to the metal. We gather the glass out of the furnace like you would honey out of a pot of honey, and it's extremely liquid. It's a little bit sticky liquid, but it's liquid. But as soon as you get it out of that furnace, out of that atmosphere that's so hot, it creates a skin on it. The air cools the glass, and it's very molten on the inside, but it's got something holding it together. And that's what you work with. You develop that skin, and you thicken that skin in certain areas by rolling the glass on the cold metal table. And then as you blow through the pipe, it inflates the glass in the hotter areas. So as you shape the glass, you're just working with heat and timing. The glass obviously has a tendency to slump and to collapse. So we're always turning, always making sure the piece is inflated and kept on center if the piece is intended to be. And it's also, you have to be warm enough that it's not going to crack or fall on the floor and explode. So you're always working in this little window of perfect heat. A lot of people will notice, they'll come into the shop and see us work, my assistants and I, and they'll notice it's really a tight-knit choreographed dance, or like a martial arts kata. It's just everything seems to kind of flow from one step to the next, and that doesn't happen immediately when you start working with someone, but it happens rather quickly because there is kind of a standard way of moving throughout a shop, and that can be translated from one person to the next. We have these small windows of time that the glass is not going to crack and it's not going to slump on the floor. We've really worked it out. And the more refined we can get that, the less we have to touch the glass, the less reheats, and the more pure the glass is. The more you touch the glass, the more it looks touched. And with a lot of the pieces that I do, I want them to look very pure, just like they just came into existence. They don't have a lot of scratch marks or tool lines. We don't talk a lot. I think it's kind of a sign to us that we do have the process distilled. For one thing, it's a teaching process. Eric's learning my timing, and by him opening and closing the door, he needs to learn when I need out, when I need in. So one day when it's his turn to be at that point, he knows this is how long you're in here for. People always ask me, like, how do you know when to come out? Do you look in there and you see the color change? You start to see it move? And it's not something that you just know, but it is something that you eventually teach yourself to just know. It's like it's an informed intuition. It's an educated intuition, and it's something you have to develop, and you develop that by assisting other people and trial and error. When somebody's watching me make a picture, there's so much concentration that takes me because there's so many things you can do to mess it up. But a more complicated piece, there's even multitudes more things that I can do to make that piece not be finished and be complete. That's why it takes me so much concentration on a larger piece, that I don't want to sweat on the piece. I don't want to tap the handle in the wrong spot. I don't want to bump into anybody. You only blow a certain amount at a certain time because the blue's next to the yellow. It's just like everything's constantly just racing through your mind as you work. And you can't explain that to anybody, but it's just a rich part of the process for me, is that being right on the edge. And maybe that is a part of me that I really like. I've always enjoyed rock climbing and things like that. I like to take things right to the point of failure. There are a lot of other artists that I look at, not necessarily just glass. There's a lot of sculptors that I look at that I see what they make, and I can see that their idea is translated very directly into their object. And it's frustrating for me to know that there are things that I have ideas that I cannot make. It's more of an idea of fluency, being able to, from idea to object. That's what's mostly important to me right now, is that I continue to study, that I could not have anything that gets in the way as far as a technical issue. From the beginning I knew that this is what I wanted to do. I knew I needed to work with glass and have my own studio, because you really can't make your ideas unless you work on them a lot and consistently. And I knew that, so that was my eventual goal, to have my own studio. I think I just studied and looked around and saw that there was this market of people that were selling their glass, and they were able to make a living doing it. It wasn't all starving artists. They were practically starving, but not all of them completely starving, but they were able to do what they loved. You know, a lot of times you look at other people and you see that, well, if they can do it, I know that I can do it. They're just a person, you know, I'm just a person, and I feel like I've been gifted in this skill, you know, I think I could do it. And things don't happen just like that, so for years I built equipment at night and worked on business plans and figured out what a business plan was, and we got a small business loan, and it all began. Well, it's not like painting. I wish it was. I wish you could just go get some canvas and oil paint and be expressive. It takes years to learn how to do it, and it's very expensive. You're keeping molten glass molten 24 hours, 7 days a week. You have to be able to pay for that somehow, and you have to be able to make work. Some work that you know is going to sell, and some work that you don't care is going to sell, but it's more expressive for you. So there's definitely a balance in running a shop. A lot of times when I show my work, like in a presentation in slides or whatever, I tend to think of it as this is what I've made, but this is not necessarily what I'm making. I don't know, I'm always kind of on this path, and going forward, I'm real quickly easy to kind of push aside what I've done because I'm really interested in what I haven't done yet. I mean, I've only been making glass for 14 years. I'm really interested to see what I'm going to be making when I've been making glass for 60 years. And look back and see what I was making through that process. It'd be a great way to study and see what kind of person you were, and see what you were going through and how it affected your work. But I don't know, I'm probably a teenager at this point.